Nisha Patel's dream of becoming a fashion designer in New York collided with Robert Langford's dangerous obsession, while Daniel Morris uncovered secrets that exposed the truth, and Arjun Mehta mourned the friend he couldn't save. Nisha Patel was only 19 when she stepped off the plane at JFK Airport, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. She had dreamed of New York since she was a child in Mumbai, imagining the skyscrapers, flashing lights, and endless opportunities. For her, this city was not just another destination. It was freedom, a chance to reinvent herself away from her family's expectations. Enrolled in a prestigious fashion design program, she carried with her the hope of one day becoming a name in the industry. But soon, reality weighed heavier than the dream. Her small apartment in Queens was far from glamorous. The rent consumed most of her scholarship money, and her part-time cafe job barely covered groceries and textbooks. She often skipped meals to save money, telling herself it was temporary. Each day, as she rode the subway past advertisements for luxury brands, she felt the gap between the life she imagined and the one she was living. Despite the struggles, Nisha refused to call home for help. Her parents had sacrificed so much to send her abroad, and she could not admit how difficult things really were. She smiled through video calls, hiding the stress from her family. At night, though, the loneliness of a foreign city crept in. The laughter of other students in her dormitory made her feel like an outsider, someone caught between two worlds. Yet there was a spark in her. She was determined to make it work, no matter the cost. Her journals filled with sketches of clothing designs, visions of a future where her name would shine in bold letters on storefronts. But underneath that ambition, a quiet fear lingered, one that she couldn't yet name, a shadow waiting to surface as her choices grew more complicated. One evening, after another exhausting shift at the cafe, Nisha scrolled through her phone while lying on her narrow bed. She had discovered dating apps as a way to distract herself from the constant stress, a small escape into a world where people seemed glamorous and carefree. Most of the profiles felt fake or uninteresting, but one stood out. Robert Langford, a sharply dressed man in his mid-40s, showcased pictures of luxury, a penthouse view of Manhattan, expensive cars, and vacations in Europe. His bio was short but confident, promising stability and generosity for someone who was adventurous and discreet. Curiosity tugged at her. Nisha knew what his profile implied, yet she clicked anyway. Messages were exchanged quickly, and Robert's charm was undeniable. He seemed to understand her frustrations, even offering words of encouragement about her studies. Soon, his tone shifted. He offered to help pay her rent and buy her clothes if she agreed to spend time with him. At first, she hesitated, telling herself this wasn't the life she wanted. But the thought of freedom from financial struggles gnawed at her. Within days, they arranged to meet at a high-end restaurant in Manhattan. Nisha borrowed a dress from a classmate and tried to suppress her nerves as she entered a world that felt far removed from her reality. Robert greeted her with confidence, ordering expensive wine without asking, his presence commanding the room. For the first time since arriving in New York, Nisha felt noticed, admired, even special. What she did not admit to herself was how quickly she was drawn into his orbit. The idea of being cared for financially felt like a solution, a shortcut to the life she dreamed of. She told herself it was temporary, unaware that this decision would set in motion a chain of events she could never escape. Robert's presence in Nisha's life became both a lifeline and a trap. Within weeks, her circumstances changed dramatically. Her cramped apartment in Queens was no longer a source of constant anxiety, as Robert ensured the rent was handled without hesitation. Designer handbags, dresses, and jewelry began to appear, items she once only admired in store windows. He took her to rooftop bars overlooking Manhattan, to five-star hotels with velvet-lined halls, and to restaurants where the waiters greeted him by name. For a girl who had been rationing meals only months before, the sudden shift felt like a dream she dared not question. But Robert's generosity was never without strings. Each gift tightened an invisible chain. He asked where she was, who she was with, and what time she would return. When she delayed in answering his texts, his messages grew sharp and insistent. At first, she brushed it off as concern, reasoning that he cared for her safety in a big city. Yet, over time, it became clear his need for control was consuming. He demanded she cancel study sessions, insisted she sit beside him during business dinners, and watched her reactions with a calculating eye. Nisha began to live a double life, carefully separating her identity as a hard-working student from the polished image Robert expected her to present. Her classmates praised her focus, never suspecting the secret she carried. At night, when she removed the expensive shoes and makeup, she often stared at her reflection, unsure of who she was becoming. The sketches that once filled her journals were neglected, her dreams of independence slowly fading into the background. Deep down, she knew she was no longer steering her own life. Robert was, and the deeper she sank into his world, the harder it became to pull away. Robert's fascination with Nisha soon grew into something darker than simple infatuation. What began as routine check-ins became constant monitoring, with endless calls and texts demanding her attention. He insisted on knowing where she went, even when it was only to the library or a coffee shop. His questions shifted from gentle curiosity to sharp interrogation, making Nisha feel as though she lived under a microscope. The freedom she had once dreamed of in New York was slipping away, replaced by the suffocating weight of his control. In his obsession, Robert went further than Nisha realized. Convinced she might be seeing other men, he secretly hired a private investigator named Daniel Morris to follow her. Daniel was experienced in surveillance and accustomed to discreet assignments, but even he was unsettled by Robert's intensity. He was told to track Nisha's movements, photograph her daily routines, and report on who she spoke to. At first, Daniel treated it as another job, but as he observed her, he began to notice how ordinary and innocent her life truly was. Through his lens, Daniel saw a young woman juggling school, part-time work, and the heavy demands of an older man's expectations. He noted how she often looked over her shoulder, as if sensing unseen eyes, unaware that she was being trailed. The more Daniel watched, the clearer it became that Robert's obsession was unhealthy. His notes reflected not a woman deceiving a man, but a woman suffocated by control. Meanwhile, Nisha began to feel an unease she couldn't explain. The city she once loved now seemed hostile, its streets filled with hidden eyes. Though she didn't know it yet, Robert's actions had crossed a dangerous line, and her life was no longer just her own. It was being consumed by his obsession. At college, Nisha found comfort in the ordinary rhythm of student life, a rhythm that contrasted sharply with the polished, demanding world Robert kept her in. It was during a group project that she grew close to Arjun Mehta, another Indian student who had recently transferred from Chicago. Arjun was warm, approachable, and carried the same sense of displacement that she often felt. They bonded over shared memories of home, street food, festivals, and the constant expectations of family. And their conversations soon extended beyond academics. With him, Nisha felt something she had not experienced since arriving in New York: normalcy. Arjun admired her determination to succeed and often encouraged her when she doubted herself. His presence reminded her of the dreams that had brought her across the ocean, dreams buried beneath the weight of Robert's control. Slowly, she began to laugh more, sketch again, and stay late in the library without feeling guilty. For the first time in months, Nisha allowed herself to imagine a life not tied to luxury or secrecy, but to genuine companionship. Yet, she was careful. She knew Robert's temper and feared the consequences if he ever discovered Arjun. She avoided posting photos, avoided being seen outside campus with him, and constantly checked her surroundings. The secrecy strained her, but the thought of losing this new connection was unbearable. Daniel, the investigator, noticed the change too. His reports showed her spending more time with Arjun, though their interactions seemed innocent. He hesitated before passing on every detail, sensing Robert's obsession would twist the truth into something dangerous. For Nisha, Arjun represented hope, a reminder that she could still choose her own path. But the more her heart leaned toward him, the more precarious her situation became, as Robert's grip was not one she could easily escape. Robert sensed the shift in Nisha's energy long before he had any proof. Her texts grew shorter, her excuses more frequent, and her availability less predictable. To him, these were signs of betrayal. When she told him she needed extra hours at the library, his suspicion flared. He confronted her one evening, his voice low but laced with accusation. He claimed she was hiding something, that she was entertaining someone else behind his back. Nisha denied it, insisting her studies demanded her time, but her calmness only seemed to fuel his anger. The charm that had once drawn her in was gone. In its place stood a man whose generosity felt more like a weapon. He reminded her of the money he had spent, the life he had given her, and how easily it could all disappear. His words were threats disguised as concern, leaving her shaken. For the first time, Nisha began to truly fear him. Back in her apartment, she opened her journal and began writing everything down. His controlling behavior, the arguments, the veiled warnings. She filled pages with dates and details, uncertain why she felt compelled to document it, but knowing instinctively that one day she might need proof. Her journal became her only safe space, a silent witness to a life spiraling out of her control. Daniel, watching from a distance, noted Robert's increasing agitation. He saw the way Robert lingered outside her building, the intensity in his eyes whenever her name was mentioned. The assignment had shifted in tone, becoming something more sinister than surveillance. Meanwhile, Nisha tried to balance her two worlds, but the cracks were widening. She could no longer ignore the truth. Robert's obsession was turning dangerous, and her secret with Arjun was a risk that could cost her far more than she ever imagined. The invitation came suddenly, a text from Robert insisting that Nisha spend the weekend with him at his lake house upstate. He framed it as a chance for them to reconnect, to enjoy quiet time away from the city. Though hesitant, Nisha felt cornered. Refusing him outright might spark another confrontation, and she convinced herself it was safer to agree. She packed a small bag, leaving her journal hidden beneath clothes in her dresser, unaware it would soon disappear. The drive north was tense. Robert tried to appear relaxed, playing music and pointing out landmarks, but his grip on the steering wheel betrayed his mood. Nisha stared out the window at the endless blur of trees, her thoughts drifting to Arjun, who had promised to help her with assignments the following week. A knot of dread formed in her stomach, though she could not explain why. The lake house was isolated, its wooden deck facing a frozen expanse of water. Snow dusted the trees, and the silence felt heavy. At dinner, Robert alternated between forced charm and sudden sharp remarks. He asked again about her time on campus, pressing for details she refused to give. His frustration built as the night wore on. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices, though the details were unclear. By morning, Nisha was gone. Robert returned to the city alone, claiming she had left after an argument. Days later, search teams combed the frozen lake. Beneath the ice, they found her body, her phone missing, her belongings carelessly scattered inside the house. The news of her death shocked the campus community. To friends and classmates, she had been a bright student with big dreams. Few knew of the dangerous world she had been pulled into, or how far Robert's control had already gone. Detectives were immediately assigned to the case after Nisha's body was pulled from beneath the ice. The circumstances were suspicious, and Robert Langford quickly became the central figure. He admitted that she had been with him at the lake house, but insisted she left after an argument. His version of events raised doubts. Neighbors had heard shouting, and his story about when she supposedly departed did not align with the timeline of when she was last seen alive. Investigators searched the property and found traces of a struggle, though nothing conclusive. Nisha's phone and journal were missing, both of which could have provided critical evidence. Without them, detectives faced a frustrating lack of direct proof. Still, Robert's demeanor troubled them. During questioning, he alternated between arrogance and irritation, often speaking of Nisha as though she were a possession rather than a person. It was Daniel Morris, the private investigator, who brought new clarity. Troubled by his involvement, he stepped forward and explained the surveillance he had conducted at Robert's request. He described how Robert had insisted on constant updates, how he demanded proof of Nisha's movements, and how his obsession seemed increasingly unstable. Daniel handed over notes and photographs he had collected, painting a disturbing picture of control and fixation. The detectives pieced together a pattern: Robert's history with young women, his financial promises, and the lengths he went to maintain dominance. They began interviewing Nisha's classmates and colleagues, who revealed how she often appeared distracted and fearful in recent months. Slowly, the image of a controlling and dangerous relationship emerged. Though Robert still denied involvement, suspicion thickened around him. The missing journal became a haunting detail, a silent key to the truth, while investigators pressed forward, determined to uncover what had really happened that fatal weekend. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing layer to Robert Langford's life that went beyond his connection to Nisha. A search warrant for his Manhattan apartment and office revealed a trail of deceit. On his computer, investigators found messages under multiple aliases, each tied to different dating platforms. Dozens of young women had been contacted, most of them international students or recent immigrants struggling with money. His words followed a familiar pattern: promises of financial help, gifts, and stability in exchange for silence and loyalty. The more the detectives read, the clearer the picture became. Robert wasn't simply a wealthy man indulging in an affair. He was orchestrating a scheme built on manipulation. Several of the women had transferred money to accounts linked to him, lured by the promise of visas, housing, or tuition support. What looked like generosity on the surface was, in reality, exploitation. The breakthrough came when officers searched Robert's luxury car. Hidden inside a compartment was Nisha's missing journal. Its pages contained chilling entries, accounts of his controlling behavior, threats disguised as affection, and her growing fear that something terrible might happen to her. The journal also confirmed her secret relationship with Arjun, a detail that explained Robert's fury and jealousy in the days before her death. Confronted with this evidence, Robert's facade began to crumble. He attempted to claim the journal was fabricated, but forensic analysis proved Nisha's handwriting was authentic. The detectives now had a timeline, motive, and direct insight into her final weeks. What had started as a suspicious drowning was no longer in question. The evidence showed premeditation, coercion, and a violent spiral fueled by control. For investigators, the case shifted from speculation to certainty. Robert Langford was not only manipulative, he was dangerous, and Nisha had paid the ultimate price. Robert Langford's arrest sent shockwaves through both the local community and the international student body in New York. The story quickly spread across news outlets, framed as the tragic downfall of a young woman who had sought independence and opportunity abroad. Reporters swarmed the courthouse as Robert was charged with murder, financial fraud, and coercion. The trial became a spectacle, every detail of his double life dissected in the media. His polished reputation as a successful businessman collapsed overnight, replaced by the image of a predator who exploited vulnerability for control and gain. In court, prosecutors presented the recovered journal as the centerpiece of their case. Page after page revealed Nisha's descent from hope to fear, her words exposing Robert's manipulation and threats. Daniel Morris, the private investigator, testified about Robert's demands for constant surveillance, his paranoia, and his obsessive fixation. Arjun Mehta also took the stand, describing the friendship he shared with Nisha and the growing anxiety she carried in her final months. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of a man who saw relationships as possessions, not partnerships. The jury took little time to reach its verdict. Robert was found guilty on all charges, his empire of deceit dismantled. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, a hollow figure stripped of wealth, power, and influence. For Nisha's friends and classmates, justice was bittersweet. Arjun grieved quietly, often seen leaving flowers at a campus memorial built in her honor. Daniel, burdened by his involvement, withdrew from private investigation altogether. Nisha's story became a cautionary tale, shared among student groups and advocacy organizations as a reminder of the dangers that can lurk beneath seemingly glamorous offers. Her dream had been stolen, but her voice, preserved in her journal, continued to echo long after her death.